After the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, Charles has automatically become the new sovereign of the UK as well as the Commonwealth realms. He chose to style his regnal name to Charles III. What is interesting about this is that whenever a British monarch succeeds to the throne, they may change their name to something else. Considering Charles's predecessors were figures surrounded in controversy, it was assumed that Charles would change his name, similar to how George VI, who used to be known as Prince Albert, chose to be styled as George VI, of course. But ultimately, Charles chose to keep his name. But anyway, in this video I thought it would be interesting to explore the not-so-glamorous lives of Charles II and Charles I of England. The reign of Charles I goes hand in hand with the English Civil War. I will try to condense it as much as I can. Charles I had succeeded the throne following the death of his father, James I of England, who by the way was also James IV of Scotland, on March 27, 1625. Charles would reign as a monarch from the years of 1625 to 1649. Charles I believed in the divine right to rule, which entails that he was chosen by God among all others, and therefore his reign was absolute. And therefore, he ruled like an absolute monarch of sorts, by imprisoning political opponents and raising taxes without consent of the parliament. Charles I would often impose, quote, forced loans, and imprison those who refused to pay without a proper trial. Although Anglican, Charles married a Catholic, and many Anglican and Protestant groups within England grew untrustful in what they regarded Charles's beliefs to lean towards Catholicism rather than Anglicanism. Ultimately, Charles would sign the Petition of Right with Parliament, which stipulated that the monarch wouldn't be able to raise taxes, nor imprison political opponents without consulting Parliament first. Charles would dissolve the Parliament shortly afterwards. In 1637, Charles sought to impose his Anglican doctrine beliefs to Scotland in order to further consolidate a permanent union between England and Scotland. Though the Scottish resisted, it actually retaliated in invading northern England. The King of England asked Parliament to secure money for his armies in order to fight the Scottish, although Parliament refused. Charles, being unhappy with the decision, ordered the meeting of Parliament to be dissolved, but they refused to comply with what they regarded to be the whim of a tyrannical ruler. Charles ordered troops to enter the House of Parliament and arrest the leaders, who managed to escape and formed their own armies, effectively starting the English Civil War fought between the Royalists and the Parliamentarians. The power struggle between these two factions would ultimately lead to Charles being captured and being put on trial. He was accused of high treason and was shortly executed afterwards. An instance of regicide like this had never happened before, nor has it happened ever since in England. England would ditch the monarchy in favor of a republic, namely the Commonwealth of England, led by Oliver Cromwell. Ironically, England would fall back into having an absolute ruler, as Cromwell became essentially a dictator. By imposing his unpopular Puritan beliefs into laws, he would become very unpopular with the general population. The English Commonwealth wouldn't last very long, as Charles II, who was exiled at the time, was invited to restore the monarchy. Charles II offered to pardon all of those who had betrayed his father, as well as the monarchy in general. Although, upon returning, he executed around 50 people. In a sort of poetic justice, he beheaded the body of Cromwell, as revenge to the way his father had been executed before. Charles II would indeed revert most of the unpopular laws Cromwell had imposed, because Charles II was a man of indulgence himself. Throughout his life, Charles II would have several mistresses. Some of those relationships would spawn illegitimate children, who of course wouldn't be considered heirs to the British throne. And yeah, that's pretty much about Charles II. He died on February 6, 1685, at the age of 54. As you can see, the name of Charles within the British royalty carries quite the controversial historical connotation. This led many people to speculate that Prince Charles would change his name once he became king. Charles's full name is Charles Philip Arthur George, meaning that he could have used George as his regnal name. Therefore, continuing the line of famous George monarchs in the United Kingdom. In fact, I don't really have to do any further research about them, because I can recall some of them from memory. George I would have the United Kingdom be ruled under a prime minister for the first time. George III was a king during the American and French revolutions, as well as the Napoleonic Wars. George V was king during World War I, and George VI, of course, was a monarch during the Second World War and was father of Queen Elizabeth as well as Princess Margaret. I would argue that the idea of changing a regal name is a little bit archaic nowadays. Queen Elizabeth II chose to keep her name anyway. Charles had been known by that name for many decades, so I think it's gonna be weirder if he had changed his name rather than keeping it. Besides, his mother had passed away, so the mourning of Queen Elizabeth was far more important than the idea of a change of his regal name. Anyway, if you've liked this video, be sure to also check out the video on screen. Thank you for watching.